You assumed you knew why the Browns relocated to Flagstaff, didn't you? That it was for protection? Or, perhaps, a clean slate, a larger home. Something so basic that it would make sense to all of us at home. But the reality, the actual reality, is so much more jarring than anyone could have anticipated. In secret, Christine Brown uncovered a hidden motive that altered everything. A motive no one foresaw. A motive that left her seething, caught off guard, and wondering about everything regarding Kody's actions and the family she had trusted entirely. It wasn't about finances, it wasn't about ease, and it wasn't about security. It was all about one single decision. One son, and the extremes Kody went to mold the family according to him, leaving the others to scramble after, feeling dismissed, betrayed, and ensnared in a lie. And as we head into this tale, you'll see that this relocation wasn't merely a change of location, it marked the creation of fissures in the Brown household that would only expand, deepen, and become more fraught with time. Stick with me, because what Christine exposed will make you wonder if you ever truly knew anything about this family and why they made the decisions that changed their lives forever. Fans thought for years the Browns' relocation to Flagstaff was easy. Safety, money, a fresh start for the family. That is what we saw on TV. And it made sense enough. A new house, a fresh beginning, perhaps even an opportunity to maintain the family unit in a healthier environment. But Christine viewed it differently. To her, all of that transpired as a betrayal. She was not asked, her views were disregarded, and the lives of the family were being reshuffled based on a decision where she played no part whatsoever. It wasn't a house or a city, just something. It was a power play. A decision made in secret, and it caused Christine to wonder where she stood in the family, and if she even had a voice anymore. The more that she learned, the more she understood that the narrative we were given on television was only the tip of the iceberg, and what actually transpired was much more complex, much more personal, and much more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The reality Christine disclosed was something no fan could have possibly imagined. The relocation wasn't for money, it wasn't for ease, and it wasn't merely for starting anew. It was concerning Kody's son Dayton. His admission to a university in Flagstaff had become the determining factor in the decision. Now the whole family's lives were being restructured around the future of one child, and no one else had any say. Christine felt blindsided, caught in an arrangement she hadn't consented to, and the anger and frustration she was holding were palpable. Imagine being in a family where your opinions and emotions are dismissed, where choices that affect your whole life are made without consulting you. That was what Christine went through, and as she herself later recounted, it was a moment that uncovered great fissures in the family structure, fissures that would continue to expand with time. The aftershock of that decision was quick and swift. Christine did not just feel dismissed, she felt manipulated. All contact with Kody became fraught. Every conversation weighted with unspoken irritation, and it wasn't only between her and Kody. The tension permeated through the other wives as well. Resentment started to rear its head, simmering first, like a gathering storm, but irrepressible. Robin, Mary, and Janelle felt the tension, and the family that had seemed so united on television was now disintegrating behind the scenes. Favorite treatment, secrets, secret agendas, all of it started to emerge. Viewers at home would never have suspected the depth of these divisions. But Christine lived it daily, stuck in the middle of decisions made without her input, and a family dynamic steadily fraying from the strain of one man's choices. The more Christine dug into what had actually occurred with the Flagstaff move, the more she understood how little command she had over the decisions purported to form her family's life. At first glance, it appeared to be a step that would unite them all. A larger home, new possibilities, perhaps even a new beginning after years of maneuvering complicated dynamics within a polygamous household. But beneath the facade, Christine started to uncover a reality that was much more intimate, much more raw, and much more maddening than anyone sitting on their couch at home could possibly dream. It was not simply a move. It wasn't about a house or a city. It was about power, control, and favoritism. And Christine was right in the middle of it all, and left feeling invisible and unheard. The day Christine heard the true reason for the relocation, the shock struck her like a body blow. The entire family had been relocated for one purpose. Kody's son Dayton had received an offer to attend a university in Flagstaff. That decision alone dictated where everyone would live, how the family would reorganize, and even whose priorities mattered most. Imagine living your life, thinking you're part of important family decisions, only to discover that the biggest choice affecting everyone had been made behind your back. That's exactly what Christine experienced. Her annoyance wasn't about being left out. It was about the breach of faith and the discovery that Kody had chosen one child over the health, happiness, and voice of the remainder of the family. For her, this wasn't a small sin. This was an action that represented the disparity that had been quietly developing in the family for many years, a disparity that she could no longer overlook. And yet, it wasn't merely Christine's ire that made this scenario incendiary. The ripple waves flowed into every area of the family structure. Robin, Mary, and Janelle, all wives who had experienced decades of complex relationships with Kody, were also on edge. Even if they hadn't known the complete rationale for the move initially, they could feel the tension, the unspoken resentment that clung to the atmosphere like the growing storm before it broke. Families can get through disagreements, they can get through small squabbles, but a choice of this size, one that upends everybody's lives for one kid, brings out cracks that had been present all along, opening up old wounds and making new ones. Christine knew that right away. The relocation to Flagstaff was not merely a physical one. It was a catalyst that brought out favoritism, manipulation, and a hidden hierarchy that made many people feel powerless. Christine's thoughts give a glimpse of life at that time that is nearly intolerable. It was like walking through a minefield in every conversation. It was like living with implicit frustration in every interaction with Kody. She wakes up to certain mornings with dread, knowing that the choices that determined her family's day-to-day living were being finalized without her input. It's not only the anger that's draining in these scenarios, it's the powerlessness, the knowledge that even when you do attempt to stand up for yourself, it might be dismissed, disregarded, or overruled. And for a person like Christine, someone who believes in honesty, openness, and respect between people, this betrayal ran deep. It wasn't simply about a relocation. It was about respect, about justice, and about finally acknowledging that she deserved to be heard. But what made this story even more fascinating, what makes it so surprising to fans who believe they are getting to know the Browns, is the disparity between what was transpiring behind the scenes and what TV viewers saw. On screen, the relocation to Flagstaff could have appeared seamless, rational, even glamorous. But off-camera, it was a whirlwind of feeling, stress, and bitterness. Christine's autobiography shows instances where she attempted to express her feelings of concern only to face dismissals or explanations that rendered her helpless. She wasn't being obstinate or unreasonable. She was demanding to be included, to be taken into account, to be given an opportunity to be involved in decisions that governed every aspect of her life. And yet, the choice was already set, the family displaced, and the repercussions of that decision were spilling over into each relationship within the home. The emotional and psychological cost of these kinds of choices is difficult to exaggerate. Christine explains how the experiences resulted in sleepless nights, infinite frustration, and an increasing feeling that the family she had devoted herself to for decades was not the secure, supportive environment she had so long supposed. Each meal, each conversation, each minor family decision was a reminder that her opinion came second, that Kody's priorities, and maybe even his favoritism, were determining the path of all their lives. And for fans, grasping this point of view, everything. It's no longer just reality television about a polygamous family going about everyday life. It becomes a tale of manipulation, domination, and the emotional fallout of choices made in secrecy. And yet Christine's story isn't only about betrayal or rage. There's also an awakening, a turning point when she starts to become aware of the patterns that have been governing her life and the lives of the other wives for decades. She understands that favoritism, secrecy, and ulterior motives aren't one-off occurrences. They're part of a more pervasive dynamic that colors almost every family decision. The move to Flagstaff, in her mind, became a symbol of all that had been festering under the surface: unequal treatment, poor communication, and the slow breakdown of trust. It's one thing to listen to a family feud on TV, but it's quite another to experience it from the inside out, living it day by day, working through the emotional aftermath, and seeing relationships break under strain. And here's where the tension comes in. As Christine discovered these facts, she came to see that this move, this one decision, may not have been an isolated event. It could be a tipping point, a catalyst that set the stage for the family's eventual unraveling, the growing isolation of certain members, and even the eventual departure of those who felt unheard and undervalued. For viewers, this introduces a level of mystery. What appeared to be a straightforward relocation was a domino that would set the whole family into hours of tension, heartache, and conflict that had long-term repercussions. The Flagstaff relocation was not just geography, it was a turning point, a low-key storm that would run through the Browns' lives for years to come. Christine's insights also show the self-awareness that resulted from these experiences. Though the manipulation and betrayal created lasting emotional wounds, they also compelled her to look at her priorities, her boundaries, and her sense of self within a family system that too often valued others' wishes above hers. The Flagstaff relocation was a lesson in toughness, attunement, and empathy with family dynamics, particularly in a family as unorthodox and exposed as the Browns. And for audiences, these lessons are compelling because they reveal an aspect of reality television that is not often seen: the psychological, emotional, and relational effects of choices made off camera. As this story unfolds, one thing becomes clear. The Flagstaff move wasn't just a backdrop for the Browns' lives, it was the spark that ignited conversations, conflicts, and revelations that would shape the family's trajectory for years. Christine's honest storytelling provides viewers the ability to look past the smooth scenes on TV, showing the messy, complex, and occasionally heartbreaking truths of a family in the public eye struggling with deeply personal issues. And as we move deeper into this tale, the tension only mounts, because if the Flagstaff relocation could uncover so much, what else could possibly be lingering beneath the surface, still waiting to come out in season 20 and beyond? Christine's narrative keeps audiences in suspense because it combines betrayal and emotional depth, frustration and introspection, personal hurt and common truths about communication, respect, and family relationships. Each sentence she offers is like a fragment of a puzzle, gradually building the complete picture of what life in the Browns' home was actually like throughout this trying time. And it's impossible not to empathize with her tension, her incredulity, and her dawning realization of how much the family's pecking order and partialities influenced events around her. For years-long devotees of the show, these are both surprising and, upon reflection, eerily foreordained. There were always hints of the fissures, but now we are seeing just how profound they were. By the conclusion of this session, the viewer should feel the full force of Christine's experience: the betrayal, the anger, the increasing solitude, and the emotional cost of one decision that remade the family. And yet, they must also experience a sense of expectation, a desire to know what will happen next, because the move to Flagstaff was merely the first in a string of developments that would continue to reveal secrets, test family loyalty, and uncover truths long kept from the audience. The tension builds, the setting is in place, and Christine's tale leaves us anticipating the next installment, wondering what lies behind the next session, and how the family will continue to deal with the repercussions of this turning point. With the weeks and months that followed the Flagstaff relocation, the ramifications of Kody's choice became impossible to overlook. Christine started to see how the underlying tensions that had always been present in the family were no longer beneath the surface. They were rising to the top. Casual interactions with the other wives were charged with implicit bitterness. Dinner was more subdued. Conversations were guarded, and the atmosphere that viewers had always presumed was peaceful was far from it. What had appeared to be an easy transition into a new city had, in actuality, brought to light deep fissures, and Christine found herself constantly negotiating a home where loyalty and favoritism controlled the emotional weather. The previously united facade of the Brown family was starting to erode in ways that would only become increasingly evident with the passage of time. The Flagstaff relocation also made Kody's priorities clear in stark fashion. While the family had left behind their whole lives for Dayton's education, it became apparent that other children, other relationships, and even Christine's voice took a backseat. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a realization of power structures within the family that Christine could no longer turn a blind eye to. She felt like she was observing the foundation of her family being deliberately and gradually remade, with no consideration for the individuals who had given years of their lives to it. Every minor choice, every domestic regulation, every discussion appeared to validate the notion that the hierarchy was now skewed, and Christine knew acutely that she was living within the repercussions of that tilt day in, day out. And yet, as Christine started to grapple with what was occurring, she also sensed that she was not alone in being attuned to these shifts. Robin, who had been the focus of Kody's attention for so long, was increasingly sensitized to the emotional isolation she felt, and even Janelle and Mary started to sense patterns of favoritism and secrecy that made them question their own positions within the family. The dynamics that had been manageable in the past were now cracking, and Christine could feel the wives' tension building relentlessly, like an unstoppable storm. Fights that had been small flashpoints of irritation were larger, fueled by months of unresolved resentment, misunderstandings, and the pervasive reminder that the Flagstaff relocation had unsettled the family's dynamics in ways unseen on camera. For Christine, the hardest part wasn't necessarily the tension with Kody or the other wives, it was the emotional toll of understanding that she'd been shut out of a decision that took control of her whole life. This wasn't about a house or a city. It was about respect, trust, and being allowed to be heard in a family setup that claimed to be about working together. Her frustration, anger, and hurt were only increased by the knowledge that the real life which appeared on television was carefully crafted, so that audiences never knew the hardship, the resentment, and the sacrifice being made in private. For Christine, life in Flagstaff was a daily test of patience, stoicism, and quiet observation of a family which she loved but no longer fully trusted. Over time, Christine started to recognize the way that this turning point, the Flagstaff move, was not an isolated event but a precedent-setting moment for the direction of the family. All decisions thereafter appeared motivated by the precedent it established. She saw a pattern in Kody's actions, decisions being made without deliberation, priorities established for certain family members, and the unspoken presumption that others would adjust and fall in line. And for Christine, who had spent decades building a life with her family, this news came as both a shock and an outrage. She knew that the Flagstaff relocation was not just a move, it was what triggered the family's ongoing turmoil, the point at which the cracks hidden beneath became impossible to overlook. What made this time so intense was the way that it challenged Christine to examine her own place in the family and where her boundaries lay. For the first time, she started questioning not only Kody's choices, but her own acceptance of cycles of favoritism and secrecy. The relocation to Flagstaff shed light on the realities of her circumstances, that her voice had been repeatedly devalued, her emotions negated, and her viewpoint disregarded. And yet, in the midst of the frustration and devastation, Christine also realized the strength and articulacy that emerged from viewing these dynamics for what they were. The Flagstaff relocation put her in the position of having to face uncomfortable, painful, and irrefutable truths, but it also provided her with the wisdom and the guts to move forward with consciousness and intention. For audiences, this discovery brings a whole new dimension to what was already an engaging tale. The Flagstaff relocation, on the surface mundane, is one of symbolic import. The density of family life and polygamy, the repercussions of partiality, and the far-reaching effects of decisions taken in secrecy and exclusion. Each of the emotions Christine expresses, anger, betrayal, disappointment, even guarded hope, is so immediate and intimate in its presentation that audiences engage directly with the drama of this unfolding situation, as if they are sharing it together with her. It's this emotional depth that turns the tale from reality television into a human story about respect, trust, and the ripple effect of decisions that run through an entire family. When the session ends, tension still hangs in the air. Christine's narrative leaves no doubt the Flagstaff relocation was much more than a geographic shift. It was a watershed, an epiphany, and a cause of strife which would go on to reverberate throughout the family's lives. The fissures which opened up at this time would go on to widen, trying loyalties, testing assumptions, and causing situations which none of the family could overlook. And for us, the audience, the suspense is nearly unbearable, because understanding that something as comparatively simple as a move could have so much at stake leaves us wondering what other secrets and subcurrents remain to be uncovered. The Flagstaff relocation is but one part of a much greater whole, and Christine's honest thoughts make it plain that subsequent pages of this book hold much more drama, understanding, and surprises. The audience at this point should be fully aware of Christine's sense, the treachery, the loneliness, the emotional burnout, and the knowledge that the family she trusted was not working on the fairness or transparency she had a right to expect. But they must also be left on edge, waiting for the next layer of revelations, pondering how these tensions will continue to play out, and wanting to know what's next. Because if the Flagstaff relocation exposed so much about favoritism, secrecy, and emotional manipulation, what else may still be just beneath the surface in the Browns' lives? The tension hangs in the air, and the drama is far from over. As tension in the Brown family remains simmering, the effects of the Flagstaff relocation hit home all the more. Christine could feel the intangible changes that affected the way the family functioned, the unspoken rules that governed behavior, the silent hierarchies that controlled whose word counted and whose didn't. Every choice, every discussion, even the simplest actions now carried the weight of favoritism and secrecy. Christine was not merely frustrated about a single move, she was frustrated about the cumulative effect of being on the sidelines, consistently demeaned, and having to settle for decisions made by Kody without her consent. She could see it in how the other wives responded, how the children adapted, and how Kody seemed to think that compliance was sufficient to keep the peace. But Christine knew better. Harmony did not thrive without fairness, and fairness had been lacking for too long. It wasn't just the adults who were feeling the tension, the children raised in this complicated household started to notice the tension. Christine observed how favoritism and implicit rules governed their interactions, how some were urged forward while others were ignored, and how the Flagstaff relocation had set the tone for an atmosphere in which everyone had to adjust, not only to the physical relocation of a new city, but to the emotional ambiguity of a family in transition. For Christine, it was especially hurtful because it wasn't merely about her own anger, it was about safeguarding the children, making them feel special, and seeing patterns of disparity quietly define their everyday existence. The Flagstaff relocation had created a shadow much broader and longer than anyone who wasn't a part of the family could have conceived. Christine also started to consider her own identity within the family. For years, she had been the fulcrum, balancing not only her own relationships with Kody and the other wives but also the emotional health of the children. But in Flagstaff, she felt a lack of control, as if the life she had created and the trust she had given her family were being undermined by each choice she was left out of. The discovery was heartbreaking and revealing. She no longer had the luxury of relying on familiar patterns or assumptions, because the very foundation of the family had been altered in ways that left her wondering about her place, her voice, and even her future in the home. It was an eye-opener, one that compelled her to face difficult realities about loyalty, power, and self-survival. The psychological cost of this time cannot be exaggerated. Christine's book recounts moments of raw frustration, restless nights, and private accumulation of anger that issues from continually being ignored. Every day in Flagstaff was a struggle between having peace, standing firm on boundaries, and being mindful of her own mental and emotional well-being. She speaks of being trapped in a dynamic wherein compromise was insisted upon, but respect and care were not given. The Flagstaff relocation, which on the surface may have appeared a change that was neutral or positive, had emerged as a combustible focus for centuries of pent-up tension, and Christine could sense it in each encounter, each family gathering, and each silent look across the room. And still, amidst all this annoyance and emotional tension, Christine started to notice patterns that made sense of the behavior she had long found so puzzling. The steps shed light on Kody's patterns of favoritism, secrecy, and unilaterality. It exposed which bonds were valued and which were routinely excluded. It revealed the unspoken imbalance in the home and the gradual erosion of trust that had been occurring over years. Christine's realization of these patterns was a source of insight, even as it made her angrier, because knowing the truth was the beginning of figuring out how she was going to get through the next pages of her life. And for the audience, this realization turns the show from reality TV melodrama into a lesson about power, influence, and the emotional ramifications of decisions that are made in secret. The Flagstaff relocation also had a domino effect on the public image of the family. As much as fans believed that they were witnessing smiling faces and apparently harmonious relationships on television, Christine's memoirs present a very different reality. The perfectly constructed image of family life that TLC presented overrode the tension, resentment, and silent wars that were happening off camera. For Christine, experiencing this reality on a daily basis, the disparity between appearance and reality was nearly intolerable. The move to Flagstaff had revealed the family's underlying dynamics, demonstrating that what appeared to be harmony was instead a thin veneer over intense and persistent conflict. And it was this dichotomy, the disparity between image and reality, that made her tale so gripping, human, and impossible to look away from. And as the session went on, the anticipation grew because the Flagstaff relocation was not one-off. It was a turning point that led to all that came next. Christine was starting to realize how previous choices, backdoor agendas, and favoritism were interlinked, spinning a web of stress and conflict that would keep building in the years to come. She understood that the emotional consequences of this one decision would have a ripple effect throughout the family, impacting relationships, decision-making, and trust in irrevocable ways. For the listener, this epiphany makes the drama and tension greater. The relocation to Flagstaff was only the tip of an immensely more complicated story, replete with intrigue, tension, and emotional investment of a family trying to hold together under extreme duress. Christine's musings also highlight a broader truth about the Brown family dynamics. The Flagstaff relocation became a frame of reference for her to observe trends of favoritism, exclusion, and emotional manipulation that had been apparent for years. It illustrated the delicacy of relationships constructed on asymmetric power, the influence of unilaterally made choices, and the emotional work needed to live in a home where openness and deference were not consistently provided. For audiences, this offers a glimpse, rare and intimate, into the intricacies of life at the Browns' home, intricacies far beyond what any reality program could, and ones emphasizing the very human ramifications of decisions made without input or equity. The audience should be able to feel the full force of Christine's experience by the close of this session, the exasperation, the rage, the sense of being pushed to the sidelines, and the emotional draining of dealing with a family in which the Flagstaff relocation was both a physical and metaphysical turning point. And yet, they too must share the sense of anticipation and suspense for what is to come, because if this one action was able to show them so much about favoritism, secrecy, and tension, what else may be hiding and waiting to emerge in the continuing saga of the Brown family? The suspense, the drama, and the stakes only increase, keeping viewers waiting for the next surprise and the next installment of Christine's saga to be revealed. As the months passed by, Christine realized the far-reaching consequences of the Flagstaff relocation on the Brown family's dynamics. What began as an easy move became a trigger, revealing the subtle cracks that had lain hidden beneath the surface for so long. The tension wasn't contained within the walls of the Neome, it was in every look, every whispered conversation, every unspoken bitterness that bubbled just below the surface. Christine sensed it in the way Kody made decisions, in the slight favoritism towards some children, and in the silent aggrieved frustrations of the other wives. The family that had long existed on a precarious knife edge of compromise and understanding now was hanging in the balance, and Christine recognized that it was all too easy for matters to get out of hand. Perhaps the hardest part for Christine was realizing that these dynamics weren't short-term. The action had built patterns that would continue to govern everyday life, affect relationships, and test trust in ways that would not easily be reversed. Any little argument, any little fight, now bore the baggage of months of tension created by feeling unheard and underappreciated. And while smiling faces and perfect family moments may have been visible to fans sitting outside, Christine experienced the reality of a home torn apart by favoritism and secrecy. The relocation to Flagstaff had uncovered uncomfortable, inescapable, and deeply life-changing truths. Christine also observed how the choice had heightened the divides between the wives. Robin, usually in the middle of Kody's focus, sensed her own stress and loneliness more intensely as dynamics changed. Mary and Janelle started to feel the favoritism that Christine had complained of for so long, and subtle alliances and tensions began to build in ways that had never been brought up before in an open manner. The Flagstaff move had inadvertently brought about an atmosphere where minor complaints fermented, quietly built resentment, and trust diminished. Christine recounts the household as emotionally volatile, where each action and statement was significant, and where the repercussions of Kody's decisions were experienced every day by all who lived under his roof. This was also an extremely reflective time for Christine. She had put years of her life into a family that she thought meant fairness, communication, and respect. But now, faced with the stark reality of unilateral decisions and favoritism, she started rethinking her boundaries, her expectations, and her place in the family. The Flagstaff relocation pushed her to face hard realities, that loyalty and love would not be enough to secure respect, and that the emotional well-being of herself and her children could not always be protected in an environment where openness and inclusion were absent. She was heartbroken about this discovery, but it also ignited a clarity and strength that would serve her through the increasingly confrontational years ahead. The psychological burden of the experience cannot be overemphasized. Christine describes nights of worry, days of frustration, and the ongoing emotional labor of keeping her own responses in check, while attempting to uphold a pretense of calm within a home teeming with unvoiced tension. The Flagstaff relocation had become a metaphor for all that was not right in the family relationship: the secrecy, the favoritism, the communication breakdown, and the gradual undermining of trust. Even the smallest particulars of everyday life served as a reminder that the family she had dedicated herself to was no longer functioning with the sense of fair play or respect for one another that she had believed it did. And yet, in the middle of all this, Christine was vigilant, taking notes and commenting on the state of her own life, aware that these revelations would ultimately find their way into the hands of the audience and shed a light on the real story beneath the cameras. Christine's suspense is built upon the expectation of what will unfold next. The Flagstaff relocation, while seemingly inconsequential to observers, had caused a cascade effect. Loyalties were tried, relationships were strained, and the fragile harmony of the household threatened by the unresolved resentments and covert agendas. Christine was able to visualize conflicts spiraling out of control, divisions growing wider, and long-term consequences taking root in a way that could not be undone. For viewers, this vantage point introduces a heightened level of intrigue and suspense. The soap opera wasn't just playing out on TV, it was being lived in real life, with emotional consequences much more profound than any on-camera moment could convey. And then there was the specter of the family's future. Christine's musings suggest the inexorable nature of change, that the fissures opened up by the Flagstaff move were just the start. Unilateral decisions, playing favorites among family members, and exclusionary patterns of behavior carried the day, and the effects could not be overlooked. The anticipation builds as Christine alludes to things in store for them, in the future: talks that would become combative, relationships that would reach a breaking point, and personal choices that would irretrievably shift the direction of the family. For the audience, it's the time when they are curious, the time when we learn that the Brown story is anything but over, and that the next one is about to bring with it revelations, confrontations, and plot twists that are going to have lasting effects. By the end of this class, the audience should experience the tension and seriousness of the situation, the emotional aftermath of the Flagstaff relocation, the silent cracks in the family, and Christine's increasing realization of the patterns which would dominate future conflict. The tension is intentional, keeping viewers in suspense, all wanting to know how the rest of the events will unfold, and what decisions Christine and the other family members will make next. The scene is set for even more dramatic disclosures, and the Brown saga is heading toward moments that will rock assumptions, reveal secrets, and enthrall viewers who have been following this family for years. And now, as we come to the last chapter of this tale, the entire significance of the Flagstaff move becomes unavoidable. What began as a straightforward move for one child's college acceptance had blossomed into a turning point that would change the course of the Brown family's lives for the years ahead. Christine had dedicated months to the emotional repercussions, observing as relationships shifted, tensions escalated, and trust began to break down. The family, outwardly serene, had been found to be a delicate system where favoritism, secrecy, and dictatorial decision-making created cracks that appeared irreparable. And Christine, caught in the middle, was both observer and participant, and she knew just how drastically this one move had altered the family's destiny. The long-term effects were stark. Christine understood the cracks the Flagstaff move exposed weren't individual instances. They were signs of an underlying pattern. Decisions Kody made, while maybe coming from a good place on his end, always favored some over others, creating emotional disequilibrium that impacted every member of the family. Christine experienced the disequilibrium daily, in every interaction, and the way the wives and children responded to each other in nuanced ways. The emotional work involved in dealing with this reality was immense. She needed to balance her affection for her family against the fact that her voice and her views were constantly undermined, something she realized both painfully and with clarity. What made the story even more fascinating is the way the move brought to light covert dynamics that audiences had never witnessed on TV. Their fans had long believed that the Browns worked under a system of compromise, mutual respect, and equal decision-making. But in reality, behind the cameras, Christine saw that a different picture exists. That of decisions being quietly made without consultation, and where the impact is felt most severely by the least prioritized. The Flagstaff relocation became a mini-drama of the larger issues of the family, all revolving around favoritism, secrets, and the emotional consequences of not being part of the decision-making process affecting your life. While it's a surprise to viewers, for Christine, this knowledge changed her life. Christine also speaks about the resilience and self-awareness born out of this process. Surviving the fallout from the Flagstaff relocation compelled her to examine not only the actions of others, but her own assumptions, boundaries, and sense of agency. She learned that she could no longer assume past patterns would correct themselves, or that she could rely on old assumptions. Rather, she had to take charge of her own voice, establish boundaries, and negotiate the family dynamics with purpose and definition. The move to Flagstaff, though painful, served as a catalyst for self-growth and a better understanding of her needs and boundaries within the complicated setup of the Brown family. The suspense and drama of the narrative are also heightened by the ripple effects experienced by the other wives. Robin, Mary, and Janelle each handled the move and its impact differently, but they were all affected by the changes in power, focus, and emotional capital. Small frictions became inflated, quiet grudges grew, and the family lifestyle became a high-stakes world where each choice had emotional repercussions. Christine's view offers insight into these dynamics, showing the human truth behind the polished reality shows. For the readers, it is both compelling and heartbreaking. A close examination of the difficulties of keeping relationships, communication, and trust intact in a family pushed to its limits. As the drama builds toward its conclusion, the full impact of the Flagstaff relocation becomes clear. It was more than a move. It was a turning point that revealed unfairness, challenged allegiances, and paved the way for future confrontations. Christine's experience serves as a lens through which viewers can understand the larger patterns of the family, decisions made without inclusion, the quiet erosion of trust, and the emotional consequences that ripple through every relationship. The suspense lies not just in what has already happened, but in the anticipation of how these dynamics will continue to unfold. The Flagstaff move is the catalyst, but the blaze it lit continues, and the viewer's mind wanders to wonder what comes next. Christine's tale finally leaves people with resolution and questions, however. The Flagstaff move uncovered things that could no longer be suppressed, illustrating the emotional consequences of favoritism, secrecy, and one-sided decision-making. It depicted the difficulty of navigating a complicated family system in which power is frequently invisible but intensely experienced. And yet, the film also leaves the audience with possibilities for anticipation. What other choices, discoveries, or conflicts lie ahead? How will the family find a way through the continued fallout of decisions made in Flagstaff? For the viewer, the mix of closure and suspense produces a compelling, indelible story. As we close this chapter, this much is certain: The Flagstaff move was much more than a change of address. It was a turning point, a revelation, and a catalyst for long-term emotional effects. Christine's observations enable us to glimpse the unseen truths behind the cameras, the burden of decisions taken in isolation, and the ripple effects that continue to take shape in the lives of the Brown family. And for viewers, the tale leaves a haunting question hanging in the air. If a single move could uncover so much, what other secrets, covered agendas, and emotional truths are left to be discovered in the life of this remarkable family? The tension is complete, but the tale is far from done. Because with the Browns, there is always something more behind the facade that needs to be dug out.